welcome to Catholic Life. My name is John Buckreis, I'm your host, and my guest today is Steve Rossi from St. Michael's Parish. Now Steve approached me many times, in fact it's been over a year, several times. He has a topic he'd like to talk about. And I kept turning him down and thinking, oh man, I don't know, that's a tough topic, you know. But I finally agreed, and I thought, you know what, I think you've got the right idea. It's a great topic, and he's going to do a great job on it. You know, it's so easy to do an interview with the Knights of Columbus or the Ancient Order, the Hibernians or the Seminarians, but this is a little different kind of a topic. And you know what it is? It's on indulgences. And by the time this show is over, you will know what and how many and the benefits and all the literature you might want to find out about it. And I thank you, Steve, for coming on.
Well, thank you,
let's
John.
take 30 seconds out for a thank you message. And when we come back, let's tackle this topic, okay?
Absolutely.
Stay tuned, folks.
The funding for this program is made possible by Fairfax Memorial Funeral Home, located at 9902 Braddock Road in Fairfax, Virginia. Fairfax Memorial is a family-owned funeral home providing full traditional funeral and cremation services. They also provide military and out-of-town arrangements to meet all needs, all faiths, and all cultures. Pre-planning is available, as well as honoring all pre-arrangements made with other funeral homes. For more information, visit them online or at 703-425-9702.
If you just tuned in, folks, you're watching a program called Catholic Life, and I'm John Buckreis, your host, and Steve Rossi is my guest, and we're talking about indulgences in the Catholic Church, okay? But before we get into that and talk about that, let's give our viewing audience a little bit of background of yourself, Steve.
Sure, John. I've been in St. Michael's Parish since 1981, and when I first moved to the Washington area, and I've been here ever since. I lived about a mile away from the house that I have lived in now for over 20 years, and would have never guessed that that would have been the case when I first moved in there, but that just happened to be. And in fact, we're about a half a mile away from each other or less, so we're neighbors as well. And the way I got involved with Plenary Indulgences and indulgences to begin with was a good friend of mine that I grew up with in Providence, Rhode Island, where I'm originally from, is an ex-professor at the University of Dallas. And I remember saying to him, hey, you know, I heard that if you go to a priest's first Mass, you can get a plenary indulgence. Do you know anything about that? And he was a professor in theology, so he would, usually whenever I have a religious question, he would be the one I'd turn to. And he said, well, yes, in fact, you know, there's a book called the Handbook of Indulgences that you can refer to. It's a very thin book. It only costs about $10 at the time.
And that's this one right
and
here.
That's that one right there.
And while you're talking about that, I'm going to set that so. There we are.
Yes. And he says, you just have to get it, and that'll tell you all of the indulgences that the Catholic Church teaches about and that you can use to your benefit.
Well, let's tell our viewing audience, first of all, let's tackle the word indulgences.
Yes.
What does that mean now, and how would you explain that to a lay person?
Yeah, well, you know, a lot of people, when they first hear about indulgences, they probably think about what the Catholic Church used to do with indulgences maybe, you know, 1,000 years ago. And you know, the Catholic Church is not a perfect organization, but I understand, not knowing too much of the history of indulgences, that they maybe even used to sell indulgences. And an indulgence is the amount of time that it would take care of some time that you would actually spend in purgatory. So it used to be associated with a certain number of days. For instance, if you say a certain prayer, you spend 10 fewer days in purgatory. And this got to be probably an abusive item that some officials in the church probably started saying, well, if you want to spend less time in purgatory, then what you can do is you can buy this particular indulgence, we'll perform the works for you, and then you or your loved ones maybe spend a little less time in purgatory.
Well, you know, the book that you sent me to read over a little bit, I read in a chapter near someplace about back in the 15th or 16th century or something way back there. The kings or the princes would, like you said, sell the indulgence so that they could build a bigger castle or whatever.
Sure. So it goes into their coffers, and that, so for some Catholics...
But you can't sell indulgences.
You can't sell indulgences. I don't sell indulgences, but I talk about them, and I have a website that that tells you how you can get indulgences for yourself and for your loved ones.
Well, they'll show that website across the bottom of the screen there.
Yeah.
But are there different kinds of indulgences?
There are partial indulgences which don't have any specified amount of time associated with them. And then there are plenary indulgences, which are my favorite.
Plenary indulgence.
Yes.
Can we analyze that word plenary? Or
Plenary means complete, or it completely wipes out the amount of time you'd have to spend, or a loved one or someone who you're performing a plenary indulgence work for. It completely wipes out the amount of time that they would have to spend in purgatory. Mm-hmm. Now, the way that works is, whenever we sin, mm-hmm. we, of course, if it's a mortal sin, we go to confession,
True.
And we confess that sin. Well, yes, the sin is actually forgiven, mm-hmm. but we still have to pay the price for that sin, and that's a certain amount of time that we would have to spend in purgatory, and it's unknown how long that might be. No one knows that, only our good mm-hmm. Lord does. So what's really nice is to do a plenary indulgence for yourself. It's great because it wipes out, and this is a teaching of the Catholic Church, all of the time that you would have to spend in purgatory from the beginning of your life up to that point. Now that is extremely encouraging news for all of us.
Wow. I never really thought about it that way. I guess
No.
I haven't paid much attention to the indulgences.
No, and for some reason, none of us have, and it's probably because it's not really talked about from the pulpit all that much.
No, it really isn't. No.
And especially when you go to a priest's first Mass, for instance, you'd think that there would be some sort of an announcement that says, next weekend we're going to have Father so-and-so is going to say his first Mass. We welcome you to come to that Mass, not just for the reception afterward, mm-hmm. but for the fact that not only you get a plenary indulgence, but the priest who's saying his first Mass mm-hmm. will also be entitled to get a plenary indulgence.
Yeah, but really when you're saying less time in purgatory and
yes.
it wipes out, but that doesn't mean you can go out carousing and drinking on Saturday night, and then just because you go and have a plenary and then stop in the adoration and you've
right.
already stole a vehicle or whatever the heck you did,
yes.
that doesn't mean that it's, no, there's some priorities
first.
first.
There are some requirements in order to get a plenary indulgence.
Explain that to us.
And what the requirements are, the basic requirements for every plenary indulgence is you have to perform a few things. First of all, a person has to truly repudiate and be sorry for all sin, mortal and venial. That means you can't just go out and do whatever you want and then decide you're going to go to confession the next day and be sorry for it, because you're really probably not that sorry for it, otherwise you wouldn't have done it the day before.
You figure, well, I'll go out and do this, but tomorrow I'll go to confession.
Right.
That doesn't cut it.
It doesn't cut it. You have to truly, in your heart, be sorry for those sins. The next thing you have to do is you have to receive Holy Communion on the day that the indulgence is sought.
Oh.
So you have to go to Mass and receive communion on the day that you're planning on getting a plenary indulgence, either for yourself or for a deceased loved one. And it has to be a deceased loved one. It can't be someone who's living.
Oh, okay. So if you have someone who has already passed on,
yes.
you can pray for them
yes.
and build up some.
So it's really a fabulous opportunity whenever someone who you know dies. Mm-hmm. You naturally, most of us send a spiritual bouquet, and I do that too. But what I write in that usually is, and I have also performed and requested of our Lord a plenary indulgence for mm-hmm. so-and-so, so that they can be allowed to come into heaven, if the good Lord says that they can come into heaven, that they don't have to spend any time in purgatory whatsoever. Well, because that's the definition of a plenary indulgence. You
sent me some indulgence works here.
Yes.
Can I read a few of these off
sure.
here? Let's see, adoration of the Blessed Sacrament for a half an hour or more mm-hmm. is one.
Yes, now that is what they call the plenary indulgence work. And there are 29 works that are listed in the book. There are about 70 indulgences in the book. Uh-huh. And 29 of them carry plenary indulgences. For instance, if you were to go to confession, this is one of the requirements, then you have to go to Mass. And then you have to say a prayer for the intentions of the Pope. And usually it's an Our Father or Hail Mary.
Well, I've been doing that. You mean I got a little bit of I got a bank account?
Well, there are so many people who do these things naturally every day. All the people who you see as daily communicants at Mass. As far as I'm concerned, there should be an announcement. Folks, you coming to Mass every day, if you just did a couple of other little things, you could get a plenary indulgence for yourself and for your deceased loved ones.
Now here's one here. Devoutly visit a cemetery and pray for the dead. Indulgence applicable only to the souls in purgatory during November 1 through 8.